Welcome everyone, thank you for tuning in for the webinar on the Australasian Recycling Label. Today we will be talking about APCO's Packaging Recycling Label program, the evidence behind the Australasian Recycling Label and how the Australasian Recycling Label works. We will be also covering all the activities that Planet Ark will be doing as part of the consumer education campaign and all the support that councils and waste educators can expect from Planet Ark. So let's begin with APCO's Packaging Recycling Label program. So what it is, this is a nationwide scheme that aims to provide consistent packaging recycling information through a standardized labeling system. What we want to achieve is to equip consumers with the ability to determine the correct disposal method for post-consumption packaging. This scheme will play a significant role to achieve 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable packaging in Australia by 2025, and it responds to the need for transparency in sustainability claims on packaging. This program is a partnership between APCO, Planet Ark, and Prep Design, and it provides reliable information on the recyclability of packaging by capitalizing on existing recycling technologies. And finally, the program and all the tools are available free of charge to all APCO members. This is a great incentive as it does not matter the size of the company, as every member has access to these tools as part of their annual membership. The aim of the program is to increase recycling rates, reduce contamination and confusion from packaging recyclability, and have a standardized recycling label across most pieces of packaging. The PrEP is largely used by the industry to understand current packaging recyclability, and it underpins the use of the Australasian Recycling Label. Now, it is not possible to have the Australasian Recycling Label on your piece of packaging without having the report from the PrEP. So as a result, the label is an evidence-based, clear and easy to understand label that will help consumers to better understand how to recycle packaging products effectively. This will ensure that companies will now design their packaging having in mind their recyclability with the current infrastructure, as opposed to wait for the recycling industry to invest in new technologies. Here you have the partnership structure and overview of the program. So APCO is responsible for managing the program and ensure its uptake from its members. The PrEP forms the evidence base for the label. To be able to maintain the PrEP up to date and accurate, we have the Technical Advisory Committee, and this committee was formed to provide feedback, and the members represent the packaging and the waste industry. And finally, we got Planet Ark, who will deliver the consumer education campaign. Now, this campaign will enable direct engagement with consumers on how to use the label, and just like the Technical Advisory Committee or the TAC, the Planet Ark has the support from the Marketing Advisory Committee or the MAC. I will expand on both these committees later on. As I mentioned before, the ARL is an evidence-based label, and this evidence is the Packaging Recyclability Evaluation Portal. The results from the PrEP assessment, as I said before, will be reflected on the type of label that will be used on each piece of packaging. Currently, there is a lack of consistency on packaging in terms of what is recyclable and what is not, and it really depends on the materials, inks, glues, etc. that are used across the supply chain of the manufacturing of a packaging component. So what the PrEP does, it assesses every material used to manufacture a piece of packaging, and it simulates its behavior in a material recovery facility, or the MRF. By doing this, packaging designers can assess how each packaging component will behave and if they will be considered a contaminant or if it will be recovered or lost. Now, there are two types of classifications within the PrEP. The first one is the technical recyclability, and the second one is the curbside access levels. Now, for the technical recyclability, there are certain parameters and thresholds for every aspect of consumer packaging. So, for instance, if a parameter may be the minimum size of a plastic item and the threshold is less than 50 millimeters in 3 dimensions, that means that any plastic with less than 50 millimeters diameter will not be considered recyclable. Now, these parameters and thresholds, they have been researched, developed, and expanded upon since 2007. With the reviews of local international guidelines, consultation with the recycling industry and MRFs, and as well as laboratory experimentation. So packaging designers, they have to include all the information regarding the packaging, such as primary and secondary material types, dimensions and weight, percentage of the weight of any secondary materials that if they have any, if the material is rigid or flexible, the color, the inks, the size of the label if they have any, as well as any additives and glues and so on. So the prep uses these parameters and thresholds to assess how the item will behave in a materials recovery facility and any subsequent processing facility such as a paper mill or a plastic processor. Now for the curbside access level, for something to be considered widely recyclable, more than 80% of the population has to have access for that particular item or material to be collected and processed through their curbside collection system. So the recyclability classification for a piece of packaging really considers both the technical recyclability as well as if the population has access for that particular item to get processed. So as I mentioned before, we got the Technical Advisory Committee, or the TAC, and they are responsible to maintain the program as a trusted source for recyclability information for all the parties involved. And how they do that is by providing advice on all the technical aspects of this recycling program, including the prep data, any recyclability calculations, any complaints from users due to recyclability results. So let's say if a brand owner, if they put their packaging through the prep and it comes either recycled or not recyclable and they don't agree with that result, they can always submit their complaint to the TAC and they will assess it accordingly. They also see any general improvements to improve the accuracy of the prep, and they approve any updates, whether that's from the waste or the packaging industry in terms of new technologies. To sum up, the way prep works is as follows. The piece of packaging is first assessed through the prep, and the report will provide a recyclability classification for each separable component of that piece of packaging. The result will be based on their curbside recyclability status, assuming it's disposable as it is, and not having any sort of consumer intervention. So let's say that something is technically recyclable, but it doesn't really meet the parameters of, let's say, the shape. So a good example would be aluminum foil. So if you put aluminum foil flat as it is, it will go through the MRF, and then the MRF will think that that's paper, and then it will go into the paper stream. However, if you scrunch it into a ball, then the MRF will detect it as aluminium, and then it will go to the aluminium smelter. This is where the Australasian Recycling Label comes in. So by classifying something as conditionally recyclable and providing clear instructions for consumer intervention so that that particular component becomes recyclable. Then the next step is that the packaging designer can choose to leave the packaging as it is, or they can make any changes such as materials, the size, the inks, and so on to make it recyclable. So now I'm going to give you a quick demonstration on the prep and how it works. Okay, so this is how the prep homepage looks like. So you just log in, and let's say you want to do your new project. So in this case, let's do a glass bottle, or no, let's do a glass jar project. So the description is just a glass jar, reference 1.1, and you then have to select where the product is going to be sold and consumed. So it can be both in Australia and New Zealand, or just Australia or just New Zealand. Let's keep it both at this time. And you can also select if there's any hazardous content. So no, I think in this case it doesn't have any. Let's assume that it's just some sort of spread. And then you have to put in all the separable items. So in this case, we got the glass jar first. Description jar, and then add separable item, and then you got the lid, which is the plastic lid. Next, and here you will have all your different separable components of your packaging. In this case, we only got 2, so we can only see these 2 here. So you have to put the primary material of your packaging. Now, depending on what type of material you select, it's going to ask you for different types of information. So in this case, it's just glass. So this is the information that you have to put in, but if let's say that you have liquid paperboard, it will ask you something different. If you have plastic, it will ask you something different. So depending on the type of material is the type of information that you have to put in. So it's going to ask you if there has any tint. It's asking you if there has any dark tint on it. So if you don't know what does it mean by dark tint, you can just click on that link and it's going to tell you what does that mean. So let's say that our glass jar is similar to this bottle here. So I'll just put yes, and it's brown. And then you got the dimensions. I'll just make this up. Let's say that's 70 millimeters. Let's assume that is 210 grams. No, we don't have any type of inks. And if there's any secondary material. So yes, in this case, we got a label that it's adhered to the jar. So you just click on add secondary material. So in this case is the label. Let's say that it's made out of I don't know, paper with polymer coating. The bonding is a water-soluble glue, so is the ink, and it doesn't really represent that much of the percentage of the materials used, so let's say that is just 2%. And the total surface area is 30% of the jar. The next item, you got the lid. So what is the material type? That is the plastic PET. It's rigid. It's asking if it has a dark shade. This is an important one. So let's say that it's dark, and let's say that we use carbon black as a colorant. And it's going to ask you for the dimensions when it's crushed. So in this case, I'll just put the same as the one before, and depth, let's say it's I don't know, 30 millimeters. It's 100 grams. Doesn't have any inks, just has that colorant, and it doesn't have any secondary material. So you just preview report, and it's going to tell you that it's not recyclable neither in Australia or New Zealand, nor the glass jar, and nor the lid. And it's going to tell you why. So in this case, in Australia, dark tinted glass is not recyclable, as well as in New Zealand. And then for the lid, carbon black in plastics results in the item not being detectable by near infrared scanners. So this is a good example of how packaging designers can go back and change those problematic areas. So if you just go back to items, and now you know that dark tinted glass does not get recycled, so you just change that. You keep still brown, but it's not dark tinted anymore. Next item. And then the lid, let's say that you make it in this case yellow, so it's not dark anymore. And then preview report. And now you can see that both the glass jar and the lid is recyclable. So once you have this, I'll go back to this presentation. Once you have the results of the prep, then using the user guide that APCO provides to their members, they can decide on the type of recycling label that they can use according to those results. Okay, finally we're going to be talking about the Australasian Recycling Label and the consumer education campaign that Planet Ark is going to be doing. So why Planet Ark? Planet Ark is a trusted source for recycling education and information. Last year we had 3.6 million views on our Recycling Near You website, and this year so far we have had 2.4. We also have a strong relationship with councils, as we got contact details and recycling information for every single one of them as a result of all of our campaigns, and we're trying to maintain this data as accurate as possible by having multiple touch points throughout the year. So what's the problem? At the moment, there are hundreds of different types of recycling labels out there. They don't really mean anything. It only means that something can be recycled somewhere, somehow, but they don't really reflect the recycling infrastructure of the place where that item is being consumed. So this leads to a lot of consumer confusion as people do not know what to do with their pieces of packaging, especially the ones that are a little bit more sophisticated in their design and have many separable components made out of different materials. This leads to wish cycling because people don't really know what to do, so they just put everything into the recycling bin hoping that it will get recycled, and they are not really aware that they're just creating a contamination problem down the system. So this is where the Australasian Recycling Label comes into place. So as you can see, there are three components on the label. The first one is the name of each separable component of the packaging. In this case, you got a box, a grab, and a lid. Then you got the classification type. The first one with the black Mobius loop, that means that it's recyclable, so you can pretty much just chuck your piece of packaging or that item into the recycling bin as it is. The second one is the conditionally recyclable label. So for this, you have some sort of instructions underneath that is going to make your piece of packaging recyclable. There are three types of instructions that you can have. The first one is check locally, although this is mostly for New Zealand. The second one will have a behavioral instruction. Like I said before, with the aluminum foil, it will say it's crunched into a ball, or let's say a very, very sturdy cardboard box. It will say please flatten. And the third option will be any alternative to curbside recycling. At the moment, the only approved program that we have as an alternative is the Recycle program in Australia for soft plastics. So any soft plastics that are part of that program will have either the store drop-off or return to store instructions, so that the consumer knows that they have to go back into the store and they can dispose their soft plastics into the soft plastic bin. Finally, the third type of label is the not recyclable label, which has the rubbish bin, so consumers know that they have to dispose that piece of packaging into the rubbish bin. At the moment, thousands of products are already labeled, and thanks to the successful uptake from APCO members, many more are being labeled every day as we speak. Here are just some program participants. Currently, we have over 120 APCO members that have signed up to the PrEP and over 50 that have signed up to the ARL. And just keep in mind that this is since the program became available for members from March and May, respectively, this year. Here you got two examples of the label. You have a close-up. The first one is banana bread, and it is packaged in a cardboard board tray and wrapped by a plastic film. So therefore, the Australasian Recycling Label says to recycle the tray at your home recycling bin, and you have to take the plastic film back to the store as they have the soft plastic bin there. The second example is that's a yogurt, and the label says that the top you can put it into the recycling bin, and the film, unfortunately, you have to put it into the rubbish bin. Now, there were three major steps on the development of the campaign. So the first one was to recruit the members for the MAC. And as I said before, the MAC helped us to develop, advise, and provide feedback on the consumer education campaign. I will explain the MAC on the next slide. The second step is the actual development of the campaign and what we're doing right now. So with the help of the MAC, we are developing all the communication and consumer education strategy. And finally, we got the campaign launched to the public, which will be in October this year on the 29th. These are all the MAC members. As you can see, all of them have different backgrounds in recycling, behavior change, waste management, education, marketing, and so on. They also represent all stakeholders involved, which are government agencies, brand owners, retailers, and recyclers. So by having this mix, we can make sure that the campaign communicates the right message to the right demographic, and that it will also support any waste management strategy happening around in Australia and New Zealand. These are our campaign strategic pillars. The first one is awareness. So what we really want to do is to increase awareness on the Australasian Recycling Label, because you cannot really educate someone on something they don't know it exists. So the first step is to raise awareness and just to make sure that people know that this tool is out there. The second one is understanding. This should be pretty straightforward, as the ARL is designed to be understood easily, but again, we just want to make sure that people really understand it correctly. And finally, action. Now, we will be focusing on this one on the second year of the campaign, as we want to focus on raising awareness and making sure that people understand the label correctly. And once they do that, then we can focus on making sure that people do follow the instructions, as is very different for someone to understand and be aware of something and actually act on it. The EPA New South Wales, Sustainability Victoria, and Auckland Council have done a lot of research around where people look for general recycling information. And all of them found that information from local councils are the biggest source of recycling information, whether that is via their website, mail, flyers, pamphlets, and so on. That's followed by the actual signage on bins, also signage on waste trucks, newspaper, radio, and TV, and finally, the information coming from family and friends. Now, many participants who said that they learned the recycling information via family and friends, they also mentioned that they learn it during their childhood. So it's very important for us to focus on schools as well. Now, that was for general recycling information and awareness on all the activities and things that are acceptable or not acceptable in your council. But when it comes just for packaging, the biggest source of information for consumers is the piece of packaging itself. So this really makes sense, as people tend to make a decision as to where to place their piece of packaging when they are in front of the bin. And this really justifies the need of having accurate labeling and recycling information on that packaging. Social media is not something that people would remember or recognize as a source of recycling information. However, it works great as a repetition tool. So people are exposed to many messages every day, and it's not possible for them to notice all of them. So usually, consumers have to be exposed around 5 times to the same message before they start noticing it. So this is why social media is a great tool to achieve this type of constant exposure. Now, we also wanted to know what types of recyclers were out there. And the New South Wales EPA segmented the types of recyclers into 5 categories. And something great about this segmentation is that it identifies recyclers as how they perceive themselves as opposed to how they really are. So this has helped us to develop the types of messaging as well as targeting communication channels that people would prefer to get their recycling information from. This is a 4-year campaign, however, this is a timeline just for the first one. So at the moment, we're currently focusing on the creation of all the content that we will be providing. We also have a baseline survey going on, and this survey, what it aims to do is to measure the awareness, understanding, and action levels that we currently have on the label. We also have the collaborator engagement activities. So that's what we're doing right now, for instance, all the webinars. That is, we will be heavily push them throughout August and September, and then once the campaign is launched, we will be still pushing them, but not as strong. We will also be having our ambassador program, and we're currently recruiting all our ambassadors. We also have the government launch in Australia, which will be on the 26th of September, and the campaign launch, which is in October. The label will be one of the sponsors for National Recycling Week, so you can expect a lot of communication during that week in November. And we will be having a lot of awareness activities throughout the campaign launch in October as well as November. That's going to be very heavily pushed, and then throughout the year we will still push it, but not as strong. And finally, we got our campaign assessment. So that will be done around this time next year, and the aim is to measure again current levels of awareness, understanding, and action, and compare them to our baseline survey and just see that if whatever we're doing is effective and if there's anything that we need to be changing. Now, we understand that councils are the biggest source of information in terms of recycling information. So we really want to provide as many content as we can and make it as easy as possible for you. So we will be providing a lot of collateral on the label so that you can just copy paste it and put it on your newsletters, on your website, on whatever you like, and just give it to your residents. We will be also doing some online material. So that's a lot of social media posts. That's for Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on. So these will be ready to use posts where you can just easily upload them. You don't have to change anything if you don't want to. You can always, here you got the Australasian Recycling Label logo. You will be able to change this to your council logo if that's what you want to do as well. As I mentioned before, the label will be one of the sponsors for National Recycling Week. And from our side, we will be using different communication channels to raise awareness and understanding on the label, and this will be done throughout the whole year. Some of the activities that we will be doing are competitions. As it was evident that a lot of recycling information was learned during childhood, a school competition will be done where students gather as many pieces of packaging with the label and separate them accordingly. So schools then can submit photos of the amount of wheelie bins they have filled up, and the winners may be chosen based on the amount of packaging diverted from landfill or by the first X amount of schools that submitted their results. The prize for the schools, we have a recycled components such as benches made out of plastic bags or stationery made out of printer cartridges, just to show children why it is so important to have a clean recycling system. The second competition will be the spot, the ARL competition, and that's a photo one. And it will consist on consumers taking photo of packaging with the label and uploading it to the competition site. So the more photos they take, the more likely it is for them to win. This competition will not only raise awareness on the Australasian Recycling Label, but it will also force participants to actively look for it. And this is a type of messaging that we will be communicating during the consumer education campaign. And what we aim to do with this type of messaging is to encourage behavior change. So finally, we have our ambassador program. So the purpose of this program is to reach as many people as possible with different interests. So usually they will be significant centers of influence within their particular community or tribe. Each ambassador will be chosen on the basis that they are a persona that people respect within their community. So they might not necessarily be known as an environmentalist, but just someone that people engage and listen to. So the reasoning behind this is that not everyone might consider themselves as an environmentalist or a greenie, but the truth is everyone is a recycler, as most people have access to a recycling service. So if you see your favorite football player talking about the Australasian Recycling Label and saying how to follow the instructions, then it is more likely that you will do it as well versus someone that you have no interest in. So thank you very much for tuning in today. If you have any questions on the label and how it works, as well as all the support that you can expect from Planet Ark and all the communications that we will be doing, please do not hesitate to contact me or to contact Planet Ark directly. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I hope it was clear. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.